Ever wondered why some people are afraid of the strangest things? Heights, small spaces, snakes, spiders. That makes some logical sense. But olives, cotton balls, foil, even peaches, they all seem really harmless. Yet there are some people out there that are scared of these things, believe it or not. Back in the early 2000s, Maury Povich ran this show where he brought on guests with interesting backgrounds, fears of cotton balls, foil, green olive. This guy had an intense fear of peaches, and right behind him, he put up a massive image in the big screen of peaches. He got super scared. He absolutely ran into a panic. He burst out in tears, ran backstage, and curled up into a corner because he was that scared. That scared of a little fuzzy, furry peach. This wasn't just him. The other people that have phobias that they brought on had the same kind of reaction. How can these develop? How do they become so afraid of these things that are neutral, that are harmless? Let's take a look. I'm Hayden, and this is Mind Cartography. To understand phobias, we need to first break down what exactly a phobia is. On the fundamental level, phobias are all about fear. Fear is an innate, survival-based emotion that has been with us since prehistoric times. In fact, it's in every animal because it is necessary to keep them alive. If we didn't have any fear, then we wouldn't be able to detect things that are harmful and position us or motivate us to run away, i.e. flight, or to fight them. There actually are some people out there that do have a lack of a fear response. It's called hypophobia. One of the main reasons for it is having a disorder called Ubarwitet disorder. What it involves, bilateral, i.e. affecting both sides of the brain, damage to the amygdala. What that translates into is a lack of fear response. Why is that so? Well, the amygdala is the fear center of our brain. This is what processes our fear reaction, and this is what drives our fear response. When it is damaged, it can result in a significant reduction of a fear response. If you're not fearing, say, a grizzly bear, then you're not going to be able to notice it as easily. You're not going to be able to kick into fight-flight mode, really, and you're going to put yourself in harm's way because your body isn't telling you that that's harmful. And so you may choose to stand your ground, you may choose to attack it, you may choose to continue as you are, and that may leave you dead. This is why fear is so important in our vitality as human beings, in our ability to live on. All the way on the other side of fear, of course, we have that phobia end. Phobias are essentially where there is too much fear. It's excessive, and so much so that it controls their life. People with phobias tend to view things with an irrational lens, in the sense that they'll see fear in things that aren't necessarily fearful, or they may exaggerate the fear in things that aren't moderately fearful, but their response to that fear is disproportionate. It isn't in line with what you'd normally feel in response to that. With phobias, we generally think that there is this catastrophic thinking response, catastrophizing. And this is essentially blowing something out of proportion to make it seem like it's much more scarier than it actually is. So an example of this is being on an airplane and thinking that any movement on the airplane means it's going to crash. You're overestimating how likely it is that that plane will crash. In reality, there's don't know the statistic, but probably a 1 in a million chance that you die in a plane crash. But people with a fear of flying may believe it's a 1 in 2 chance that if they get on the plane, it's not going to come back down, it's not going to land. Alongside this catastrophic thinking is avoidance. Now think about it, if you're afraid of something, what's the best way to deal with it? Never expose yourself to it in the first place. Because if you're afraid of the beach and you never go to the beach, well, no harm, no foul. You're done, you're good, you're safe. But that really isn't that great for a lifestyle. Alright, so that's what a phobia is, but how does it develop? Well, the main aspect as to how phobias develop really comes down to experiences. Particularly if it's a direct experience where someone's been harmed, then that sticks in our brain and our brain tries to remember it. And our brain has these systems for connecting threats so that we can learn how to best deal with them. And this system of learning threats and developing a great response to them really kicks off with what we call classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is this learning process by which we're able to connect two things that happen at roughly the same amount of time, and our brain hardwires to think that these things are two connected things. The term classical conditioning came out of a set of experiments done by Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s. What Pavlov did was he essentially had some dogs, he filled up their bowl, and then he rang a bell every time he fed them. Now, over time, the dogs were able to pair that bell with the food being given, such that they learned that if the bell was going to get rung, it meant that they were going to get fed. This is what we call classical conditioning. Now, this experiment makes more sense for our phobia situation with the research of John B. Watson in 1920. So John B. Watson was a famous behavioral psychologist who did this famous experiment using little Albert. Little Albert was a 9-month-old baby, and they set him up in this experiment, gave him some fun things to play with, some white fluffy toys, including a little rat, and he loved playing with the rat. He really enjoyed it. Watson came in and he made a loud noise. It started Albert, and he cried. He got upset because of that noise. But Watson kept doing this time and time again. He kept making this noise when little Albert was playing with his toy. Little Albert, in his small little brain that was still developing, 9 months old, connected the rat and the noise together. What did this mean? He started to fear the rat because the rat signaled the loud noise coming into play. So he became quite scared of the rat and other fluffy things. What about how phobias are maintained? How does that happen? Well, when it comes to maintaining phobias, we look into the lens of opera conditioning, another form of learning from behavioral psychology that developed in the 1940s and 50s, particularly from an experimenter called B.F. Skinner. Now, Skinner did these experiments where he put rats into a chamber and he put a lever in there, and soon enough, the rats realized that if they pressed on that lever, they got some food. The rats learned pretty quickly that the more they press this lever, the more likely they're going to get fed. What is happening is here is there's conditioning taking place, or learns that pressing the lever responds with food. This is a process that we call positive reinforcement. The reverse of this is what we call negative reinforcement. This is the removal of something harmful. So we're going to be more likely to do things that remove something harmful the next time. Skinner set up his experiment in a similar way to show negative reinforcement. What he did this time was he made the floor electric in this little box and put the rats in there, and then he showed a light right before the floor was about to go electric. What he was doing here was trying to show to the rat that the light on the wall was an indicator that the floor was going to become electric. Now, at the start, they didn't realize this and they got electrocuted. But over time, the rats realized that if they pressed the lever after the light came on, then it turned off the electrocuted floor and they would remain safe. And so repeated exercises this, the rats eventually learned that when the light comes on, they press the lever and then the floor isn't electric anymore. So this is negative reinforcement. Now we can see this with phobias in the sense of avoidant behavior. People, when they're exposed to their phobia, are very afraid. But if they avoid their phobia, then they learn that no harm was done. They're safe, they're okay, they're protected. So what do you think they're going to do next time? Well, they're going to avoid it again and again, and it leads to an avoidance cycle where they never expose themselves to their fear. The thing with this though is this avoidance creates a pattern of learning where they only learn that the best way to deal with their fear is by avoidance. That never allows them to get over their fear, to overcome it. Taking this all back to our example, around peaches as to how a phobia of peaches could develop, well, there may have been an experience that this person had when they were younger, a traumatic experience involving peaches. Maybe as a little kid, they were out in the schoolyard and they got bullied because they were eating peaches. Or maybe they got attacked with peaches. Or maybe they have really strong sensitivity to different textures. And as a kid, they tried touching some peaches and their high sensitivity created a strong negative reaction to that peach, which made them feel a strong fear response. And then they started to fear it. And that was enough to condition their fear to peaches. Their brain paired peaches with fear. They're essentially seeing this peach and their brain is saying, that's a tiger. Maybe that's a tiger that we're looking at. A big, scary tiger. That's what their brain sees because that's what it's learned. And so when someone is exposed to that fear, on the outside, it looks like just a peach. And I'm sure in the person with their own eyes, they see a peach. But what their brain interprets, what it processes, and what it emits back to the person in terms of those electrical signals is that's a tiger, be deadly scared of it, let's do something about it to protect ourselves. Over time, this avoidance would have snowballed, and made up this tiger in his head of what a peach is to be bigger each time. And at the same time, also, he's avoiding any kind of situation to really challenge that inaccurate belief that peaches are dangerous, that peaches are scary, that peaches will hurt you. So that phobia remains. So now that we know how phobias can develop and how they can get maintained, what do we do from there? People recover from phobias a lot. People get some good treatment for phobias. How does that work? How do people recover from a phobia disorder? Well, the best treatment for phobias is what we call cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly exposure therapy. Now, exposure therapy, like it says in the name, is essentially exposing the person to their fears. By exposing them to their fears, we give them the opportunity to test out their inaccurate beliefs about their phobia and work out that that peach, that cotton ball, that green olive, that spider isn't as scary as it was made up to be in the head. One of the great developments that's happened with exposure therapy over the last 20 years or so has been the development of one session treatment by Lars Goran Ost. Essentially, this is a single session of exposure therapy that's crammed into 3 hours. So what happens in this process of one session treatment for phobia, essentially it starts out with what we call psychoeducation, and that's what I talked about in terms of explaining to the client what's going on with their fears. Why do we have that fear response in our body? What is the natural response for our body and brain in terms of responding to that fear? And also providing accurate information on their fear, in terms of the amount of spider bites that happen each year, where particular spiders like to live, how many spiders are actually venomous, giving you that information so the person can make up in their own head as to how dangerous spiders actually are. In this psychoeducation component, there'd also be a lot of questions asking about what exactly is it the person is most afraid of when it comes to this phobia, when it comes to this fear. With the spider, do they think it's going to jump on them? All these belief patterns are taken in and used as things to test out in the exposure part of the session. Now, the exposure part will be set up into generally a fear hierarchy. So you'd be starting at the lowest level of exposure to your fear. So if it's a spider, starting with just looking at a photo of a spider. And then moving up to it's closer to you, it's next to you, it's on your arm, building up. That's what the fear hierarchy is. So it allows the process of the person to feel comfortable at each level before they build up to the harder levels, which are more intense, more difficult. And that's a surefire way to work through anything you're afraid of, regardless of whether or not it's a dedicated phobia or not. And the exposure session in OST works that way in that stepwise fashion. And the aim is to get the person to the point where they don't really feel much fear at the highest level of that fear hierarchy. Taking the main aim from Lars Goran Ost himself, expose the client to the phobic situation in a controlled way and enable him or her to stay in the situation until realizing that the feared consequences does not occur. And that's essentially what happens in a single session exposure session. Thank you for listening today. Hope you liked it. This is the start of my channel called Mind Cartography, and I'm going to be doing a lot of different videos like this that are really psychology focused, unpacking different areas of mental health, the mind, behavior, emotions, and breaking down why these different things happen for you. So if you enjoyed the video today, please give it a like. If you'd like to listen to more, subscribe and follow me along in the journey as I enter this YouTube space. And let's start learning a lot more about psychology.